Hello, everyone. My name is Sneha. Welcome to episode 3 of Higher Success. I am joined today with Albert.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for being here again, Albert. And today's episode is really exciting because we have students from the University of California, Riverside, UCR, a psychology class called the Lifespan Development, who have submitted some questions for us today. And Albert has graciously agreed to answer some of those questions, so I'm very excited about that. Thank you guys for submitting your questions. All right, so Albert, before we jump into the questions themselves, let's give them a little bit of background in case they missed previous episodes. Do you mind sharing with us again what your diagnosis is?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed, I think, at the age of, sometime between the ages of 4 and 6 with Aspergers Syndrome, which as folks in this class and for those watching, is known as a higher form of, or high-functioning autism.
Okay, great. Thank you, Albert. And have you ever had any sorts of therapy growing up? Speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis. Have you had any of that growing up?
I have had it growing up, though sparingly at a much lower rate than others. At my diagnosis point, I went to therapists to get I would say diagnosed, obviously, and then prior to going to college, there was also an evaluation period too, where it was determined that I had some form of Aspergers syndrome and would require some sort of disability going into college.
Okay, so that was when you were still at high school and they confirmed your diagnosis.
Yes.
But between that time and high school, did you have any specific speech therapy or occupational therapy?
Not that much that I can recall.
ABA?
Actually. Not even that.
No job coach?
None of that either.
None. Okay, so you haven't really had any specialized forms of therapy.
Yeah, my parents kind of just took that diagnosis and they kind of ran with it, and they did what they could to raise me in a neurotypical lifestyle.
Got
which,
it.
Is for those who are watching the video, I guess normal people, if you will. People who don't
Neurotypicals, right?
Yeah, neurotypicals.
All right. So let's jump into some of their questions. Number 1, what are misconceptions about people with autism?
I think the biggest misconception with folks who have autism is that it gets confused with, I think, the notion of mental retardation, right? I think people think that autism is straight up a disability, and they kind of just leave it at that.
Okay.
And I think that people who do have autism, it's, as we've discussed in this video and in a lot of research online, it occurs along a spectrum. So depending on how much of it you have, it really kind of determines where everything goes from there. And so I think that's the biggest misconception.
Right. Autism is a very, very wide spectrum. No two people with autism are the same. I have never had 2 clients and I think to myself, oh, those 2 clients are really similar. Never. Each person is so completely different. And if you're on the lower functioning end of the autism spectrum, you may have some sort of intellectual disabilities, right, that are more obvious or more severe than those on the higher end of the spectrum, but that doesn't mean that autism means mental retardation, as you said. So it's a great point, Albert. All right, the second question is, how can family and friends help to support loved ones who may have autism?
I think that comes from, I think it's different for every person.
Okay.
I would say that when it comes down to support, it's really it comes down to being patient, right? Listening to them, understanding how they feel, asking the right questions to get to the root of just about anything and everything, whether it's behavioral or personality or things like that. I think, as with anything, when you might be going through something that has that's like a trait of yours and could be a struggle, staying patient, asking the right questions is always so key to having to seeing success with someone who has autism.
Right. So patience is key, and I also want to note that you talk about asking the right questions, but sometimes whether you have autism or not, asking the right questions, the person may not be able to answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's important. Again, what Albert is saying is stay patient with them, and support them through this journey, because it's not so simple. They may not understand why they are doing something differently than you, and it's probably very frustrating for them as well. So patience is key. Thank you. Next question. And we touched upon this in a previous episode, but let's get into a little more detail. What are some personal benefits to having autism, and is there any situation in which you might consider it a gift?
Well, I would say that people who have autism and Aspergers Syndrome specifically have the gift of very, very specific passion. I know mine, and I don't work in this field, but is urban planning and freeways and roads. And for other people, it could be physics, coding, very technical things that people just immerse themselves in.
Right.
And so I think one of the benefits of having autism, and one of the great things, is potential for job security.
Right, yeah. If you think about that, you're madly passionate about something to the point maybe of obsession, but you can probably work in that field at a different level than someone else, because you're not likely to get bored, or you have that intense focus because you're so immersed in that topic that you do things more quickly and more accurately than your neurotypical peer or employee. So that's a great point.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is
you wake up loving what you do.
Yeah, and that's...
maybe you don't know why, you just do it.
Right, and so it's you and I might go to work to be reinforced by, the paycheck at the end of the week, right? Some people, including myself, maybe at some point would not want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work were it not for that paycheck, right? Then you have a whole different type of reward where, regardless of getting the paycheck or not, you just love doing what you're doing. And so the special interests come in handy, and I think a lot of employers are noticing these days the talents and the skill set that those with Asperger's and autism spectrum disorder have. And so when you are going in for a job interview or meetings and stuff like that, make sure to focus on those and show why it helps. All right, next question. Are there certain sounds or sensory stimuli that bother you? And if so, how do you deal with them?
For me, not as much.
Okay.
But I know for a lot of folks with autism, and I think even Temple Grandin talks about this in her book, the whole notion of being held,
right,
and how that makes one feel like they're wanted, or makes one feel like they're safe and comfortable.
Okay.
I know that on the other hand, some people with autism don't like being held,
right,
and those are things that really, really, really disgust them, because it's like, okay, you're invading my personal space.
Right.
As far as like smell or touch, there's not really anything off of my own personal experience that I can say that I feel anything like of disgust towards.
Okay. Yeah, and so I've had a lot of different clients, and again, each one of those different clients has different sensory needs and is affected by sensory input in a different way than the next person. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Not only what may be bothering the person, whether it's a certain sound or a bright light, but also how that person copes with it, right? You really have to get to know each person that you're working with and determine what the best solution is for them. All right, well, that wraps up this episode. Thank you again, Albert, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, UCR, for the awesome questions, and hopefully we'll see you again next week, where we discuss disclosing your diagnosis, whether you should or shouldn't, and if you do, how. All right, thanks, guys.